Yoon Sang-woo had spent 10 years telling himself that disappearing was the same as protecting. That cold wire transfers were a kind of love. That a man who controls entire cities from the shadows could afford to be a ghost to his own daughter. He had been telling himself this story so long, he almost believed it. Then, on a sunny graduation lawn, in front of 400 witnesses, the story stopped mattering, because his body did. He slumped, he fell. And the woman who caught him, who moved before his own armed bodyguards registered the threat, whose hands reached him before the ground did, was the black woman he had hidden from his empire for a decade. His secret wife, his daughter's mother, the woman who owed him absolutely nothing. Have you ever saved someone who did not deserve it? Not out of lingering love, not out of weakness, but simply because you decided, in the ruins of everything they broke, that you would not become what they feared you would. Drop your answer in the comments and hit that subscribe button as you listen. This is not a love story. It is a reckoning. She caught him anyway. And not one person on that graduation lawn understood what that meant. Not the bodyguards scrambling to their feet. Not the guests pulling out their phones. Not the dean frozen at the podium. They saw a woman catching a man. They did not see a decade of silence folded into the steadiness of her arms. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. To understand what Yoon Sang-woo lost, you have to first understand what he was. In 7 countries, his name was spoken the way people speak about weather, not with emotion, but with the quiet acceptance of something that simply exists and cannot be reasoned with. He did not run the kind of operation that made headlines. He ran the kind that made headlines disappear. Shipping routes, construction contracts. The right silence was purchased at the right moment from the right officials. His syndicate, the Yoon Network, had been built over 30 years by his father and handed to him like a crown made of razor wire. He wore it without flinching. To the outside world, Sang-woo was untouchable. Inside, he was something else entirely. 10 years ago, he had a wife. He had a daughter who was 7 years old and called him Appa with the specific, unself-conscious trust that only small children carry. He had a home in Oakland that smelled like Olivia's cooking on Sunday mornings and felt nothing like the world that had made him. Then a man named Director Lim sent him a photograph. That photograph has never been described publicly. Sang-woo destroyed the original within an hour of receiving it, but whatever was in it was enough to make a man who had never, in 30 years of criminal empire, shown a single moment of visible fear, go completely still. He made a decision that same night. He did not discuss it with Olivia. He did not explain. He transferred the first of what would become 12 years of monthly wire transfers into an account in her name, packed nothing, and walked out of the house in Oakland before sunrise while his daughter slept. He told himself it was protection. He told himself that distance was the only wall strong enough to keep Lim's reach from touching them. What he never asked himself, what he had not let himself ask in 10 years, was whether Olivia would have chosen that wall herself, given the choice. She would not have. And somewhere in the architecture of his silence, Deputy Boss Choi had been watching. Choi had served the Yoon Network for 15 years, smiling at the right moments, absorbing every secret, cataloging every vulnerability. He was patient the way predators are patient, not calm, but coiled. He had known about Olivia and the daughter for 3 years. He had been deciding what to do with that information ever since. Choi had been deciding what to do with that information ever since. But while he calculated, Olivia Tambers had already become someone he was not prepared for. She did not break. That is the first thing you need to understand about Dr. Olivia Tambers. Not that she survived. Surviving is the minimum, and Olivia was never a woman built for minimums. She took the wreckage of a life that had been decided for her without her consent, and she built something so solid, so entirely her own, that there was not one corner of it that carried his fingerprints. The wire transfers arrived like clockwork every month. She sent every one of them back. Every single one. She put herself through her medical residency on student loans and night shifts, and the specific, bone-deep exhaustion of a woman raising a child alone, while also becoming exceptional at something that demands everything you have. She became a board-certified emergency medicine physician by the time her daughter was 10. She added toxicology certification 4 years after that, drawn to it with a focus her colleagues found impressive and slightly unnerving. Nobody in her department fully understood why one of their most gifted ER doctors spent her research hours studying the chemical architecture of synthetic poisons favored by global criminal networks. Olivia understood. She had always believed in knowing the world you came from, even if you chose to leave it behind. What her colleagues also did not know was that she had quietly consulted, twice, for federal agencies trying to identify untraceable compounds used in high-profile deaths that had been ruled natural causes. She had solved both cases. She had asked for nothing in return except that her name be kept out of the reports. That was Olivia, extraordinary on purpose, invisible by choice. She had built a home in the Oakland Hills, raised a daughter who was brilliant and grounded and completely unafraid, and constructed a peace that was not fragile in the way that peace built on avoidance tends to be. Hers was the kind earned by a woman who had looked directly at her own pain, named it clearly, grieved it properly, and then decided what kind of person she intended to be on the other side of it. She was not over him the way people get over a head cold. She was over him the way a healed bone is stronger than the original. The break had happened. It had knit closed, and what remained was something that could not be broken the same way twice. She came to the graduation for her daughter, only her daughter. But she was not surprised to see him sitting 4 rows ahead, and she noticed, with the precise clinical eye she could not fully switch off, that the color in his face was wrong. That his hands, folded in his lap, had a faint, almost imperceptible tremor. She noticed, and she told herself it was not her concern. She almost believed it. 20 minutes before the ceremony began, Deputy Boss Choi poured his boss a cup of coffee. It was a small gesture, attentive, even, the kind of thing a loyal second-in-command does for the man he has served for 15 years. Choi held the cup with both hands. The way you offer something to someone you respect, and he smiled as Sangwoo accepted it without looking up. Sangwoo had never had any reason to look up. That was the precise vulnerability Choi had spent 3 years engineering. The neurotoxin was synthetic, colorless, completely odorless. It had been developed by a chemist in Vladivostok whose name appeared in no database that a standard forensic lab would ever think to search. It was designed to do one thing with elegant, terrible precision: accelerate the heart into a violent arrhythmia that would register on any standard autopsy as a sudden, massive cardiac event. Untraceable. Undetectable. The perfect ending for a king whose own people had quietly decided his reign was over. Choi watched him drink. Then he folded his hands in his lap and turned his eyes to the stage, the picture of a patient, devoted lieutenant waiting for a graduation ceremony to begin. What Choi did not know, what nobody in that syndicate had ever thought to ask, was what Dr. Olivia Tambers had spent the last 4 years of her research career specifically studying. The names of the graduates began to be called. Sangwoo's body registered the poison the way a building registers the first tremor before a collapse, a deep, interior wrongness that has no external face yet. His jaw tightened. His breath changed. The tremor in his hands, which Olivia had noticed 20 minutes ago from 4 rows back, shifted from faint to visible. Then his heart lurched. It did not slow. It did not simply stop. It seized, a violent, stuttering arrhythmia that buckled him sideways in his chair as though something internal had simply given way. His bodyguards were on their feet instantly, hands moving to weapons, eyes scanning the perimeter for a shooter, a threat, something they could neutralize with the tools they understood. They were looking for a gun. Olivia was already moving. She was through the row of chairs before the first scream left anyone's mouth, her medical mind categorizing everything in real time: the cyanotic tinge at his lips, the specific rigidity in his shoulders, the pattern of the collapse, and what she was seeing did not match a heart attack. It matched something else, something she had read about in classified federal case files and peer-reviewed toxicology journals at 2 in the morning in her home office. She caught him. She lowered him to the ground, and as she pressed her fingers to his neck to find his pulse, her eyes landed on something that stopped her cold. Along the edge of his tattoo, barely visible, was a faint bronze discoloration in the skin, a precise, unmistakable chemical signature. This was not his heart. Someone had poisoned him, deliberately, expertly. And they were still sitting in this crowd. Olivia did not have time to find them. She had a man dying in her hands. His pulse disappeared at 11:47 in the morning on a sunlit graduation lawn, surrounded by 400 people who had no framework for what they were witnessing. The paramedics arrived in under 4 minutes, which is fast by any standard, but they came in hot and uncertain, reaching for a defibrillator with the energy of people confronting a problem they believed they recognized. Olivia stopped them with 3 words. "That won't work." She said it without raising her voice. She said it the way she said everything in a trauma bay, with the flat, absolute authority of someone who has been the most competent person in a crisis so many times that urgency no longer registers on her face. She identified herself, took the emergency kit, and in language precise enough to leave no room for argument, she told them exactly what she needed and exactly what she was doing. What she did not tell them was how she knew. That would have taken longer than Sangwoo had. She worked on her knees on the grass in her plum-colored dress, administering a specific sequenced cocktail of cardiac drugs that had no business being the correct protocol for a standard arrhythmia, but was exactly correct for what she now understood was coursing through his system. His bodyguards stood in a useless perimeter around her, guns they could not fire, threats they could not neutralize, watching a woman in a dress do what none of them could. She felt his heart stutter back into rhythm beneath her hands. It was not a moment she allowed herself to feel. Not yet. She stood, turned, and found her daughter standing 10 feet away in her graduation gown, her face dismantled with terror, her eyes moving between her mother and the man collapsed on the ground. Olivia walked to her. She took her face in both hands, these same hands that had just pulled a man back from the edge, and she looked at her directly. "Walk across that stage," she said quietly. "Go get your degree. Your father's past will not steal your future. Not today." Her daughter looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded, straightened her shoulders, and turned back toward the ceremony. That was her daughter, built from the right materials. Olivia stepped into the ambulance as the doors were closing. In the compressed, humming silence of the moving vehicle, she noticed Sangwoo's secure phone vibrating on the gurney beside him, a phone his bodyguards had not thought to take. The screen showed an encrypted message, 1 line, no name. "Confirm status. Package should be delivered by now." The sender was saved under a single title, Deputy B. Olivia read it twice. Then she locked the screen, placed the phone in her coat pocket, and looked at the barely breathing man before her. She now knew exactly who had done this. Olivia just chose her daughter's honor over criminal chaos, saving the man who abandoned her with nothing but her brilliance and her grace. If you respect the unstoppable power of a mother's dignity, smash that like button right now and type "she caught HIM" in the comments. Stand with Olivia. She knew, and knowing changed everything about how she walked through those hospital doors. The cardiac wing of Oakland General was familiar territory. Olivia had privileges here, had worked these corridors for 11 years, knew every supply closet and every shortcut and every face that belonged. So she saw the ones that didn't within 30 seconds of the gurney coming through the double doors. A man in scrubs near the medication station whose badge was clipped too high and whose eyes were moving the wrong way, not watching the patient, watching the entry points. A second one near the supply cabinet, shoulders carrying the particular tension of someone performing stillness rather than feeling it. Not medical staff, placeholders. Choi had moved faster than she expected. She said nothing. She took control of the gurney from the paramedics with the natural authority of a physician on her own floor, and she moved Sangwoo toward Trauma Bay 3, not the bay they were steering toward. Not the one the compromised staff was positioned around. And she did it smoothly enough that the men in the wrong scrubs needed a full 4 seconds to recalibrate. 4 seconds was enough. What she had not anticipated was how brazen the second attempt would be. The man came to the gurney directly, a syringe already uncapped, moving with the confidence of someone who had done this before and had never been stopped by a woman with a clipboard. Olivia had spent 23 years working in emergency medicine. She had been grabbed, threatened, and screamed at by people in the worst moments of their lives. Her hands did not shake. She brought the clipboard down on his wrist with enough force to send the syringe skidding across the floor, caught it with her foot before it could shatter, and had the trauma bay door locked from the inside in under 8 seconds. What she did not know yet was whether anyone on this floor could still be trusted, or whether Choi had reached further into this hospital than she had calculated. That question would have to wait. It did not wait long. Choi arrived 18 minutes later with 4 men who made no attempt to look like anything other than what they were. He knocked once, a courtesy that was also a threat, and when Olivia opened the door, she opened it only wide enough to fill the frame herself. Behind her, monitoring equipment beeped with the fragile, steady rhythm of a man barely holding onto his own life. Choi looked at her the way men like him always look at women like her, like she was an inconvenience, like she was temporary. "Step aside," he said. "This does not concern you." Olivia looked at him for a moment, just a moment. "The compound you used," she said quietly, "is a synthetic neurotoxin, 3rd generation, Vladivostok origin. It binds to cardiac ion channels in a way that standard antiarrhythmics cannot reverse." She tilted her head slightly. "There are 4 people in this country who have published research on its chemical structure." She let that land. "I am the only one who has the reversal formula. It lives in my head, not on paper. And if you move one more step toward this room, Yoon Sang-woo dies on that table, and so does every piece of leverage you think you have over his empire." Choi's jaw tightened. For the first time in 15 years of calculated cruelty, he had no next move. Choi had no next move, so he waited. And while he waited, Olivia went back inside and saved her husband's life. The reversal took 40 minutes. It was not dramatic in the way that television makes these things look. No sudden gasp, no eyes flying open, no moment of cinematic resurrection. It was quiet and technical and precise, the way real medicine almost always is. She administered the antidote in 3 sequenced doses, monitored his cardiac response with the focused stillness of someone who had done this in her mind 100 times before she ever had to do it with her hands, and she did not leave his side once. When Sang-woo opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was the foot of his bed. The second thing he saw was Olivia, standing at the window with her back partially to him, her arms folded, watching the corridor outside with the calm vigilance of a woman keeping watch over something that belongs to her. Not him. She had made clear, in ways that required no words, that he did not belong to her anymore. She was watching over the door, over the possibility of what came next. He watched her for a long moment before he said anything. He took in the plum-colored dress, still immaculate despite everything, the steadiness of her posture, the complete absence of relief or collapse now that the crisis had passed, because for Olivia, he understood slowly, the crisis had simply moved to the next phase, and she had moved with it. He had spent 10 years building fear. She had spent 10 years building something that could not be burned down. "Olivia," he said. His voice came out smaller than he intended. She turned. She looked at him with an expression he could not fully read, not warm, not cold. Measured. The look of a woman who has decided exactly how much of herself this moment is entitled to. "You're stable," she said. "Your heart rhythm is holding. You saved my life. I saved our daughter from watching her father die at her graduation." She said it without cruelty, just clarity. Those are different things. He closed his eyes briefly and opened them. There was something he needed to say that he had no right to say and no good way to begin. He tried anyway. "The money I sent." "Don't." He stopped. She looked at him for a moment longer, and something behind her eyes shifted, not softening exactly, but acknowledging. The way you acknowledge a wound that has healed into a scar. It is no longer an emergency. It is simply part of the landscape now. "There's something you need to tell me," she said quietly. She had seen it in his face the moment he fully surfaced, something beneath the humility, something urgent. He exhaled. "Choi didn't just try to kill me," he said. "While we have been in this room, he has already taken the headquarters. He has the accounts, the network, the operations." He looked at her directly. "He did it this morning, before the ceremony. He planned both moves simultaneously." He paused. "He also knows where our daughter lives." Olivia heard him say their daughter's name in the same sentence as Choi's, and something in the room changed. Not her face, not her posture. Something quieter than that, the specific, imperceptible shift of a woman who has just moved from responding to a crisis to ending one. She reached into her coat pocket, not for the phone, for a folded manila envelope she had carried in quietly from the ambulance, the one Sang-woo's men had not thought to check for because they were looking for weapons, and Olivia had never needed one. "He already made his move," she said. "I made mine 3 hours ago." Choi came through the door 11 minutes later with the energy of a man collecting what he believed was already his. He had 4 men with him. He was almost smiling. He looked at Sang-woo conscious in the bed, recalibrated slightly, and then settled his gaze on Olivia with the particular contempt of a man who has never once been genuinely outmaneuvered by someone he discounted. "You're still here," he said to her in English, making the language itself an insult, a reminder of what he believed she was in this world. An outsider, a civilian, a woman who had wandered into something she could not possibly understand. "I'm still here," Olivia agreed. She opened the tablet. She turned it to face him. The screen showed 6 simultaneous live feeds. Choi's secondary operations facility in the Port District, federal vehicles surrounding it, agents moving in coordinated formation through the loading bays. The private financial routing office in Emeryville, sealed, personnel in zip ties on the sidewalk. The network server location that was not supposed to exist in any document. Lights on, doors open, men in federal windbreakers carrying hard drives to waiting vehicles. Choi's face did not collapse all at once. It went in stages. Comprehension first, then the specific, nauseating arithmetic of a man counting what he has just lost. "The toxicology report I filed with my federal contacts this morning," Olivia said, "included the full chemical composition of the compound, its synthesis origin, its known distribution network, and a complete forensic chain of custody linking its acquisition to 3 of your operations accounts." She folded her hands. "They have been moving since 9 a.m. The men behind Choi were no longer looking at him the way men look at someone they follow. They were looking at the exits. It took less than 3 minutes. Federal agents came through the corridor door with the calm efficiency of people executing a plan that had been in motion for hours. Choi said nothing as they moved toward him. There was nothing left to say. The quietest woman in the room had already said everything, in a language he had never thought to learn, evidence, precision, and the particular patience of a woman who had been preparing for exactly this moment without him ever knowing she existed. As the door closed behind him, Sang-woo looked at Olivia from his bed. She was already looking back. Her expression was not triumph. It was something more settled than that. "Now," she said, "we need to talk about what happens to your empire." Choi spent 15 years believing power belonged to the loudest, most dangerous man in the room, and a brilliant, dignified woman just dismantled everything he built without raising her voice once. If you believe in that kind of justice, subscribe to this channel right now and turn on notifications. The best is still coming. What happened to his empire was, for the first time in 30 years, not the most important thing in the room. Their daughter arrived 40 minutes later, degree in hand, still in her graduation gown, her eyes moving immediately to her father in the hospital bed, with an expression that was complicated in the way that only children of absent parents understand, relief and grief arriving at the same time, through the same door. She had her mother's posture and her father's eyes, and she had built herself, largely, without either of them in the same room to witness it. That was the part that sat heaviest in the silence. Sang-woo looked at her the way a man looks at something he has no right to be proud of but cannot help himself. She did not rush to him. She crossed to her mother first, squeezed her hand once, and then pulled a chair to the side of his bed and sat down, close enough to be present, far enough to be clear that presence was a choice she was making, not a debt she was paying. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Sangwoo tried to do what men like him always do when they have run out of every other option. He offered money. He offered the empire. He laid it out with the exhausted generosity of a man who has only ever known one language for love and is only now beginning to suspect it was the wrong one. His accounts, his holdings, his loyalty, his name if she wanted it back. Olivia listened to all of it without interrupting. Then she said, simply and without performance, "I didn't save your life because I want your empire, Sangwoo. I saved you because our daughter deserves a living father who actually shows up, not a ghost who sends wire transfers." The room held that sentence for a long moment. Their daughter looked at her hands, not because she was uncomfortable, because she recognized the truth of it in her own body, in the specific place where a father's absence lives in a child who learned not to mention it. Sangwoo did not argue. He did not negotiate. For possibly the first time in his adult life, he had nothing to leverage and no position to defend and no story to tell himself that made him the reasonable one. He simply sat with it. What nobody in that room said aloud, what hovered in the recycled hospital air between all three of them, was the question that actually mattered. Not what he was willing to give up, but whether he was capable of becoming someone worth letting in. Those are not the same transformation. One is a transaction. The other is a reckoning that takes years and has no guarantee. Olivia looked at him steadily. "The condition is not negotiable," she said, "and it will cost you more than money." She placed a single folded document on the bed beside his hand. He looked down at it, then back at her. His face changed. The document was a legal dissolution framework. Every syndicate, every holding, every account that had been built on 3 decades of fear and blood money, redirected in full to a consortium of medical research foundations, several of which, Olivia had made sure, focused specifically on toxicology and emergency medicine access in underserved communities. She had prepared it the night before the graduation, because Olivia Tambers had never once in her life walked into a situation without knowing what she intended to walk out with. Sangwoo signed it 4 days later, without negotiation, without a counteroffer, without asking for anything in return. The business world noticed immediately. The underworld noticed faster. The story that circulated, that the Yoon network had been dismantled not by a rival, not by law enforcement, but by the quiet insistence of a black woman from Oakland who had never once raised her voice, traveled through certain circles with the particular velocity of something people found both impossible and completely believable once they heard it. Nobody who knew Olivia Tambers found it surprising at all. What nobody knew yet, what had not been confirmed in any of the reporting or the rumors, was what Sangwoo had done with the one thing the document could not transfer: his time. The question of whether a man who had spent 30 years being powerful could learn to be ordinary, whether that transformation was even possible once a person had lived that long inside a particular identity, was one that Olivia had deliberately left unanswered. She had given him a door. She had not told him what she would do if he walked through it. She found out on a warm evening in August. She and her daughter were at a small restaurant in the Temescal neighborhood, the kind of place with paper menus and good lighting and no reason to be there except that the food was honest and the birthday was worth celebrating properly. They were laughing about something: her daughter's new apartment, the state of her moving boxes, the specific chaos of the beginning, when the door opened. He came in quietly. That was the first thing she noticed. No advance men, no posture of arrival. A simple jacket, dark off the rack. The kind of thing a man wears when he is no longer trying to be looked at. His collar was modest and high, the tattoo underneath it covered with the deliberateness of someone who understood that some symbols belong to a life you are no longer living. He saw them. He did not move toward the table as though it were already his. He stopped, he waited, he asked. Olivia looked at him for a long moment, long enough to read what was real and what was performance, because she had always been able to tell the difference, even when it cost her to know it. What she saw in his face was not a man trying to reclaim something. It was a man trying, for the first time, to deserve something. She reached over and pulled out the empty chair beside her daughter. "Sit down," she said. "Stay for the whole dinner. Ask your daughter about her future." He sat, he stayed, he asked. And for one ordinary evening in August, in a small restaurant with paper menus, Yoon Sang-woo finally learned the difference between a life that commands a room and a life that is actually worth living. There is a person in your life right now who has held you up quietly, without credit, without asking for anything in return. You know who they are. The only question is whether you will tell them before life finds its own way of making the point. If this story moved you, share it with someone who deserves to hear it. And if you know a woman who has carried more than her share with more grace than anyone noticed, this one was for her.